So welcome back to Job Search Strategies. Thanks again for joining us. Today, our workshop is on making connections, informational interviews, and networking. And I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Chris Smith. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself for those that are in the audience that weren't here for the last workshop?
Sure. My name's Chris, as Joe said. I run our postdoc office here at NC State and work with Joe and the rest of the professional development team. And I'm here to help Joe talk about networking and information interviewing with you all.
All right, great. So the sign in is on the next slide for attendance today, and thanks again. And just so you all know, if you view this asynchronously, make sure that you, on our YouTube channel, make sure that you look in the comments for this exact same attendance form. All right, so how to participate today. In case you're new to the format or you haven't attended one of our workshops tend to have small activities built into them. And we also offer a sort of Q&A session towards the end on either platform, whether that's on Zoom or YouTube. The live stream, you can ask your questions in the chat function. So the agenda for today is that we're going to cover networking, then informational interviews, and then we'll do the Q&A and a little bit of a breakdown about the activities. So after we cover networking, we'll have a small little elevator pitch activity where we have you sort of draft some things, some materials up or begin to draft them. And then we have informational interviews, and Chris is going to walk through a small little demo on LinkedIn and how to use the alumni tool. And then we'll have some resources to share and a Q&A session. So our goals for this particular session are for you to understand the value of networking and where it fits in your career exploration. Also to develop strategies to help you feel more comfortable with networking, and to recognize how informational interviews can also assist in career choices and professional development activities. Informational interviews can be a key tool for sort of understanding and creating sort of professional development plan for yourself while you're still in school. So they're a great way to do a lot of different, they accomplish a lot of different things. And then some of the outcomes for today's session are going to be for you to begin the work on your elevator pitch, also to develop a network strategy, and then to also set up, conduct, and analyze. This is kind of a homework assignment, if you will, but for you to set up, conduct, and analyze / utilize an informational interview. And we're sort of briefly thinking, or we were sort of talking a little bit when we were putting the workshop together about possibly doing a networking event that for everyone who had accomplished or completed a informational interview to come back together later on in the summer as part of job search strategies in order to share how the results went, how things went, and also to share some contact information and things. So stay tuned, we'll follow up with more information. All right, so networking. So the goals for networking sort of vary based upon the situation. You can do networking in an environment where you're at a professional conference and you're attending talks, and there are small little pockets of time for networking. There are also networking events that are held. I've mentioned, and some of our other presenters have mentioned a few of those, and we'll be sure to provide you with some more resources for locating those as well. But your goals are sort of situational based, meaning that, you know, the way in which you network and also what you're sort of trying to achieve is very different based upon those situations and contexts. But for the most part, you know, what we're trying to do when we talk or think about networking is we're thinking about ways in which to sort of meet people and learn about career options in an area. And when we think about an area, what we're really talking about are whether that's like thematic in terms of like industry titles or types of types of things that you may do in a particular industry job category, or whether that is geographic. Our last presenter had sort of talked with you all about deliberately electing to come to the RTP area for her postdoc because the RTP has a lot of PhDs that go into industry and transition successfully. And there's a lot of industry here. And so she talked about sort of in her career search targeting this geographical area. So those are those are also things that can be taken into consideration with networking. We also, as a goal for networking overall, you want to begin to build your professional connections based upon shared interest. And by shared interest, we're thinking here, or what we mean by this is not simply your research interests or your disciplinary specific interests, but also hobbies, shared backgrounds, etc. Part of a large portion of networking and the work that you're doing in establishing a personal connection or a professional connection is sharing your interests and sharing your sort of like hobbies, what you do outside of the lab, that type of thing as well, to establish that connection. So the other thing that we're sort of interested in doing when we're thinking about networking is collecting contact information for follow-up conversations. For instance, an informational interview, which we'll speak a little bit more about here in a second. All right, so advice for networking. Networking can be kind of awkward, right? Especially for all of us that have gotten into academia. By and large, the most part, we may be introverts as a group. But networking requires us to sort of get outside of our shells. I know I am an introvert, so networking and talking individually and in groups takes a lot of like mental energy. But advice, I think it's important. I wanted to sort of leave you all with some practical tips for where to begin and some practical advice on how to begin networking so that you could think about and reflect on developing your own strategy for it. So where to begin? You can always begin networking with either sort of a two-prong approach here, an opening question or a sort of opening statement. Hi, my name is, nice to meet you. And then you can flow into a question. Are you working on anything exciting at the moment? Again, more situational based openings can be, what did you think of the talk or the program if you're at a conference? And also you sort of have, your opening statement that you can begin with. I'm currently working on, my research focuses on, and I'm hoping to leverage my professional degree to do X, Y, or Z, so that they have some context. Chris, can you think of anything that you would like to add in terms of like advice for networking?
So that first question about, are you working on anything exciting? I learned about this from a podcast I listened to. I think we often ask like, so what do you do? Or like, where do you work? But that question could potentially be perceived as could like negatively affect someone's self-esteem if they're like in between jobs, right? So like we're more than our job. So like by having a question like, are you working on anything exciting? It kind of leaves open the opportunity for someone to talk about a side hobby if they like identify with that more than their career, right? So someone might in their day job, I don't know, be an actuary, but what they're really excited about is writing, I don't know, young adult fiction, and that's what they really want to talk about. So I think having a question that's less about their job and more about what they enjoy doing will help you learn more about what people's real passions are. So that's a little tidbit of advice I have for people. I know it's hard to not say like, so what do you do? Or what's your job? But that could be alienating if people are like in between jobs and they have to say, oh, well, currently I'm, and then it's kind of like awkward. So that's my little piece
Yeah,
of it.
no, absolutely. I think that, when we think about networking, some of our advice, even moving forward is how to avoid those awkward situations, right? Where you alienate the person without really trying to alienate them. Um, and I think more to your point, Chris. So in this first activity, what we're going to do is, so as you listen to me sort of talk about the activity, go ahead and begin to work on drafting your elevator pitch. So what we're going to do is draft an elevator pitch. So we're looking for like maybe 30 seconds here. Some things that I tend to talk about, and Chris, more to your point here, is or think about when I'm putting together elevator pitches or working with trainees on elevator pitches, is that it's all about making a personal connection. Keep that in mind. Yes, this is a professional setting, but you want to, the way that I think about like the rhetorical situation here and your goals are, I want you to figure out a way to sort of put your personal narrative and your research narrative together. Um, so answer the question when you draft this like elevator pitch. Why do you do the research that you do? Like, what really what drove you to do that research, right? So what I mean here is that if you're a polymer scientist who works on a problem X, Y, or Z. The end of your elevator pitch may say, and the reason, I work on these things, I work on projects X, Y, and Z, and I'm very passionate about them because I think chemistry can help us solve social issues that we're currently dealing with, or chemistry can help us with sustainability issues, or can help solve larger global crisis. So that's sort of like what I'm thinking about when I'm talking about like putting together the sort of research narrative and the personal narrative. It's all about when you put these pitches together, allowing them to engage, allowing the audience to engage with you, giving them multiple points of engagement. So, if I said like I study, mid, early modern literature, 17th century poetry, specifically John Donne's satires and John Milton's polemical works. That's even in even amongst literature faculty, that's like wildly specific, super narrow, and it really doesn't allow too many. If there's someone else that studies a different time period, doesn't really let them provide them with any way of engaging in my work, if that makes sense. So we're going to give everyone, so what we'd like to do with the activity is we're going to give you about 2, 3 minutes here. Hopefully you've already been working as I've been sort of going along here talking. Give you 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes to put together your pitch, your elevator pitch. And then we're going to, bear with us, we're going to attempt to put you into breakout rooms to then work on practicing your elevator pitch. So I see in the questions we have like, what is an elevator pitch? So the elevator pitch is sort of like your introduction of yourself. So hopefully that activity you got to meet at least a few people. Chris, how'd that go in the rooms? All right.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we talked about in our room toward the end was, the whole point of this pitch slash introduction of yourself is to get across what you want to get across to these people you're talking to, right?
Yeah.
So you might even end it with whatever your goals are, right? Like, and I'm here because I'm really excited about careers in biotech, right? Or whatever. So that then maybe that leads them to like interject what they know about that thing. So it's sort of about what your goal from the exchange is as an attendee. If that makes sense. To like lead people to what you're trying to get from the exchange.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, first of all, thank you so much for bearing with us and letting us give the breakout rooms a little bit of a test drive here in job search strategies. and we will welcome any feedback on how we can make that a little bit easier. I got some messages from some folks. It's difficult if you're on a different device. That's good to know. So, all right, moving forward. So advice for networking, sort of continuing. So once you've introduced yourself and you're over that, the elevator pitch, the initial introduction, the question then is like, the volley, right? This is how dialogue and dialogue works. And so really what we're sort of thinking about here and what I'm sort of calling the volley is, they return or they respond. And so you're sort of thinking about, whether you ask them a question, whether you move the conversation in a more personal direction. And so a couple of things, Chris and I were talking about this a little bit as we were putting the workshop together. You know, as you're sort of responding to them, it's important to sort of read body language. It's important to sort of get a sense of like their answer and how you might, again, as Chris pointed out, direct conversation. Maybe your pitch ends with you're interested in biotech, and it's pretty clear that they're not interested in biotech, and you don't want to just that doesn't mean you have to turn around and just walk away from them, right? You can still engage, you can still learn, you can still have a conversation. And I think like one way of continuing that conversation is to ask them about other teams and units of people that they collaborate or that they work with in their role. Or you can sort of, if their sort of response to your introduction or to the conversation is that you want to, you feel comfortable moving it in a more personal direction, you might ask them what they do outside of the lab or the company for fun. Again, sort of as Chris has been sort of alluding to, really making sure that you're trying to establish that personal connection is very important. Because people want to talk and want to engage with what they like to do for fun and what they get excited about. And it's really just about being curious about them and being curious in a way that invites them to talk and then, allows you to have that sort of conversation that you're looking to create with, I see Chris, what happened to our presentation? No worries. So that allows you to have that conversation with them and allows you to network. The other thing that's sort of tricky in networking, right, especially if it's one of these events where it's like an hour long or 45 minutes long, or how it's a time sort of networking event, and you show up for that space, and everyone shows up in those spaces and sort of understands that there's the sort of rules of engagement, if you will, or the sort of terms of meeting in that space is that everyone's there to network. And so your goal there is to talk to a lot of people. And that means that you have to have some type of a sort of exit strategy, or the drama exit stage left, right? You have to have some type of plan for, or at least understand how to exit the conversation gracefully. I think that for myself, I often sort of say, thanks so much for talking. This has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed talking with you all. Can I have, do any of you have business cards that I could follow up with, that I can follow up? I'm gonna, circulate, or I'm gonna go talk with some others in the group. Chris, your advice for like exit strategy, or exit, not an exit strategy, but your advice for like how to exit gracefully, if you will.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think all the stuff Joe said's great, and the other thing is just to kind of say, I hope to meet some more people, or I really want to make sure I meet some more people before this thing ends. So maybe we can follow up, down the line, and again, exchange contact info. So kind of using, the goal of I want to meet some more people before the event ends is a good way to kind of get out of the conversation. Because, some people are talkers, and if you don't
Yes.
interject, they will talk for you for 30 minutes, which is fine if it's going well. But if your goal is to meet a bunch of people, that's kind of hindering your ability to meet other people. So that's my advice.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so networking, we've exited. We've come to the end of the networking portion here, and just a few things, just like the job that I wanted to emphasize to end with here on networking. Just like the application process is, it takes time, it takes energy, and it takes reflection, and it takes planning. But it's rewarding. So keep that in mind, right? Like it's rewarding. I often have met folks in my professional network who have become, whenever I go to a conference, I always check back in with them and see, these have been great relationships that I've built over the years. And we get coffee and we go to lunch, and it's really rewarding. It's really great. And I know that I have them as a connection. If students are coming through and I can support them or I can introduce them, make an introduction, it's fantastic. So networking, it's time consuming. It takes a lot of energy. It takes reflection. It takes a little bit of a plan, or, you have to think a little bit about it. But it's super rewarding. So Chris.
All righty. So on to the next level, I guess. And why
Yes.
why do you need to do all these things? So we'll talk a little about what an information overview is, but one thing to keep in mind is most jobs aren't advertised. So the whole point of a network is to learn about positions before they're advertised, or maybe positions that are never advertised, right? So if you think about on the side of a company, putting a call out for applications invites all sorts of unknowns, right? Like, who's going to apply for this? And we have to do all this work to dig through all these applications to find like the one or whatever. So if a company can get around not doing that by leveraging networks, right, to say like, such and such on the team, do you know someone who's really good at whatever, Python coding to help us do this gene sequencing thing? Like, they would obviously rather go that way, right? Because if they trust Sue and Sue knows, I don't know, Dave, who's great at this thing from her network and can quickly connect him to the team, that's obviously much better than going through the whole process of trying to find the Dave in the list of all the people, right, who will apply and may or may not be qualified. So essentially, companies will try not to advertise a position if they can get away with it, right? Because there's so much uncertainty in hiring someone who you don't know, right? Who you don't know, like, is this going to be a good fit? A lot of energy goes into onboarding people. So they want to, kind of know ahead of time that this person becomes vetted. So that's sort of high level why you should care about all this. And these stats vary from, place to place, but I think it's reasonable to say over half, and anywhere up to like 3/4 of all jobs are probably not advertised. So if you're only looking on a job board to find jobs, you're missing a whole bunch of jobs. And you can almost think of it, and again, this might sound negative or cynical, that the jobs that are advertised are the jobs they couldn't fill internally, right? Or via their networks, right? That's not to say it's a bad job, but just like they probably exhausted their opportunities to fill it within their networks. And so now they're like, okay, we're going to put it out there in the world to try to find someone. Again, not to say those aren't bad jobs, but those are jobs that they couldn't fill via other means. And so you want to be one of those people filling the job via the other means and not having to go through the application portal of death to get screened out. So what is informational interviewing? Basically, the point of an information interview is to learn more about a person, their career, their kind of role, what it's like, and like the day-to-day life of this person doing this role. And then how they've made the transition. That's especially relevant if there's someone with a similar training background to you, right? So if they have a PhD or a master's, or if they did a postdoc, that's going to help you think about how you might navigate to the transition since they've done it. So the whole point of this is to gather information. So you can go and Google all you want about all these roles, right? But that's not necessarily what it's really like in the role, because roles vary from company to company, even with the same job title. So the more you can talk to people in roles at different places, the more you can get a feel of like, this role at company X looks like this. And the same title at company Y might look very different. So maybe company X is very flexible and you can work from home. Maybe company Y expects you in the office from 9 to 5 and is very regimented. And again, not to say one of those is like better than the other, but obviously you should choose the one that fits the culture you want in your career. So that's essentially why you should be doing these. So basically you meet some people at a networking event, and some of them might be doing things that sound interesting to you. And so then you might follow up to set up a time to talk, right, about their career, their path, how they like their role, etc. And so that's what an information interview is. So this could be over Zoom, on the phone, when we're back to meeting people in person, over coffee. These should be relatively, I wouldn't say short, but they should be known links for the people. So when you reach out, you should say like, can I have 30 minutes of your time to talk about, your career? So make it very clear what you're asking so that they know what to budget, and that it's not unclear to them how long they're going to be in this conversation. Being respectful of people's time is always good. So here are some questions you could ask. We have some resources toward the end of the presentation with a whole bunch of different questions, but these are basically fact-finding missions, right? So you might ask questions like, how did you get into this career? What does a typical day look like? What do you like about your role? What might you change about your role, right? To kind of get a feel for what it's like to do this role. Another great way to use it is, let's say it's going along and the more they talk, the more you realize like, this sounds like not a good fit for me. Then toward the end, hopefully they start talking about other parts of the company, or you might ask like, well, what other units, kind of like Joe was mentioning, do you work with in this role? And maybe you learn about a whole different division in the company. That sounds more, again, from what this person's telling you, like something that may be of interest. So another valuable thing to do in these toward the end is to say, do you know someone else in that division or someone else at your company that you think I should talk to? And obviously they're getting to know you throughout this conversation as well, right? What you're kind of looking for. And hopefully they can help connect you to the next person to talk to, right? Whether that's someone doing something very similar to what they're doing, but maybe it's at a different company, but they know through their network. Maybe it's someone in the company, but does a very different role, but from what you've been talking about, like that role might be of relevance, right? And having this person connect you to the next person makes it much easier for that connection to happen, right? Because this person knows the person they're connecting you with. So they can say, hey, Sally, I want you to meet Joe. I just talked with him, last week about what I'm doing, at Biogen. And he mentioned he was very interested in regulatory affairs. And I know you run that division over there, or you're involved in that. And I thought you two should find time to talk, right? So then Joe doesn't have to just randomly message this person as like, who is this guy, right? Someone else is connecting the dots for him. So that's something you should always try to get out of the end of each one of these, is another person to talk to, so that you can continue to build the network, right? And you're getting closer to talking to the people that maybe are doing the thing you could see yourself doing in the future, right? And then the follow-up is kind of a whole art. For the sake of time, I don't want to get way into it, but obviously this is just like the first exchange, right? And we want to keep building the relationship over time. So that's why connecting with people is important on LinkedIn or via email, and kind of dropping them an update every so often, right? Taking good notes so that you kind of know what you talked about, right? Or what they're working on at the company. So maybe you see something of relevance and you might mention to Sally that, hey, I know we talked about you guys are moving into this therapeutic space, and I saw this interesting paper that I thought you might be interested in. Like, that's all it has to be, like a very simple little follow-up, but it shows you're like listening and that you're trying to like add value and keep a conversation going. So the follow-up is also important. And I don't know if we have any questions, Joe, but I'm just going to keep going so we can kind of get to all the things. But a very important thing about the information interview is this is not about a job. This is about you learning about a role and learning about pathways. So we don't ask for a job here because you just met this person. Why should they, one, even if they could give you a job, give you a job? Two, once you start talking about a job, the dynamics change, right? So it can come off as I don't know if exploitive is the word, but extractive, or that you're trying to like, why did this person reach out to me anyway, right? Like they just want a job. They weren't really interested in hearing about what I do. This was all just to get a job. I mean, that makes them feel icky. It makes it awkward. Sometimes they will pivot very quickly in how they're talking about things, right? Because once you're talking about being a potential colleague, they might not be as forthcoming with you about some things, right? Because now it's becoming more like a formalized discussion. So never ask for a job. Even if you're on the job market and unemployed, don't ask for a job in the first exchange. Like you need to build a relationship. Now, maybe in a couple weeks, you know, that might be the time to like make it known that you're like looking for opportunities, but you need to be more subtle than just asking for a job, and never the first exchange ever. So it's very important. All right. So I know we don't have a lot of time, but I can quickly do a LinkedIn demo, or we can answer questions. Joe, what do you think we should do given time?
I think we're getting a couple questions that are coming in. Why don't we do, yeah, everybody vote real quick in the chat.
So the whole point of LinkedIn, and again, I think people here know,
So
some people may know kind of what the point of this is. Yeah.
Let's run the demo.
Okay.
And everybody, that looks overwhelmingly like everyone wants to see the demo. And then everyone, if you want to start to load up the chat queue now as we're watching Chris do the demo with your questions, we can get through the Q&A as well.
So, you know, LinkedIn is the best way to find people, right? So like the other question of all this is like, well, how do I find people to talk to, right? Like, you know, how do I begin this whole thing of like, you know, the informational interview? So LinkedIn is your friend, and I highly recommend it. If people here don't have a LinkedIn account, you should make one. So I'll show you the alumni tool. I think it's a very powerful tool that allows you to quickly filter down a very large group of people into a manageable group of people you could actually physically look through and see like, oh, that person sounds like they're doing cool things. Let's reach out. So that's what we'll do here real quick. So every school should have a page. So if we put in North Carolina State into the search, we should see school. So you always want to go to the school page, not any other derivative. You'll know you're on the school page because there'll be an alumni option on the left, which is what we're going to be using in this demo. So on the left here, you can see, I have all these updates, sorry, like home, about, jobs, alumni. So that alumni tab, the fourth one down on the left, is what we're gonna play around with here. Obviously, we're doing NC State, but you could do this for your undergrad institution if that was a different institution. If you're currently a postdoc and you did your PhD somewhere else, you could use that institution. So use all of your potential connections to do this. So first of all, you can see we have a lot of people. We have 180,000 NC State alumni on LinkedIn. That's a lot of people, right? But you can also see down here, there's all these different filters, right? We can see where they live, where they work. If we go over the next button here, we can see what they do. These are very broad job families that I don't really advise, frankly, and what they studied. So essentially degree. So one way you could use this is, let's say you have a spouse who just got a job in San Francisco. You're going to probably be looking for a job in San Francisco, right? So we can filter by location, right? So we can put in just alumni in San Francisco, right? Instead of all 180,000 alumni, now we're at 4,600 alumni in San Francisco. Down here on the right now, you can see where they've worked. It's been filtered. These are where all the NC State alumni in San Francisco work. And it may not surprise you that they're all Silicon Valley IT type companies. But perhaps one of those you've heard has a great work environment and you want to like talk to someone who works at Google, for instance, you can filter by that. So there's 228 NC State alumni at Google. So now we're down to a relatively reasonable number of people, right? We scroll over here to the right, we can see what they studied. Again, it might not surprise you that a lot of them studied computer science, but maybe we'll go down to like a less obvious one. So maybe we'll look at the 8 people who did physics or whatever, right? So now we're down to 8 people. And here are the 8 people down here at the bottom. Here are 8 people who work at Google, who went to NC State and studied physics, right? And so one way you can use this is to just see like job titles. Again, some of these I don't think are like things you wouldn't know about, but like software engineer, right, is a pretty common one. Here's strategic cloud engineer, right? Or Android developer. So it kind of gives you an idea of like what kind of job titles you might be looking for at Google. And then possibly, again, you could click on some of these people to see more about their path, right? So do they have a bachelor's in physics? Did they do a master's in physics, PhD, etc.? The other cool thing is you can leverage your shared connections here. So it'll show you if you have shared connections with these people, right? So I don't know Jan Wang, personally, but 3 of my connections know him. So that you could use that to make an introduction. Even if you don't have a shared connection, you have a shared experience and that you're training at NC State and they trained at NC State, right? So the power of the alumni tool is the outreach is always possible. Now they may not respond, but your like intro message might be, Jan, I see you got your physics degree at NC State and whatever, and now work at Google. I'm currently a physics grad student and very interested in careers, at Google, and would love to find time to talk to you about your role as a software engineer at Google, right? So you kind of played the NC State connection, and you kind of made it clear how you found him, right? And I think people are more likely to respond if they kind of know where you're coming from. And again, if they kind of see that, oh, well, this person was maybe like me 10 years ago or 5 years ago, right? Like they're looking to transition and I've transitioned. So I think the fact that I would use the alumni connection quite a bit when you're reaching out. And that's why doing this, using this tool is very helpful. The other thing you can do in here is put in terms up here at the top. So we're kind of super filtered. So I'm going to turn off a few just so we're not like killing ourselves with like no options. But you could literally put PhD in here and see, are there any physics PhDs in the San Francisco Bay Area, right? 38 came up, right? This is where they work. So Google, Cyclotron Road, which I don't even know what that is, but we could look into it. A National Accelerator, Waymo, etc. Right? So the other way you can play this is you may not have a clue what Function does, but clearly it's a thing and people work there. So you might do some digging to figure out like, what is that company? What are they doing? And then you could reach out to that person because it may be of interest to you after you do some homework. So it's a super powerful tool, highly recommend it. I know it's 2:30, so I'm gonna stop talking and take questions.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you all sticking with us for the little bit of extra time that this particular job search strategy session ran. I really appreciate the feedback from everybody on the breakout rooms. We will be sure in the future to let you know in advance that we're going to have breakout rooms and that you may want to think about your surroundings if we're going to ask you and invite you to turn your cameras on. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. Thanks so much, Chris, for helping out with the informational interview side of things here. And thanks, everyone. We will see you on Monday, I believe, is the next job search strategy. So thanks again, everyone. Take care and see you all next week.